So in order to answer this question about whether there are allies for the UK Labour Party as it is today in Israel, then we need to understand a little bit more about Israeli society, about Israeli politics. And the way that I'll be doing that today is mostly through what I would call a Gramscian framework of thinking about hegemony, of thinking about how a historical bloc constitutes itself. And it's not going to be a theoretical talk, but just for people who are maybe less familiar with the terminology, the basic idea of hegemony as practiced by the Italian revolutionary Antonio Gramsci was that in capitalist societies there is always a block of people who are induced to participate and to support the system as it is, mainly because they think it can't be much better for them. This is the best that they can get out of life. And they're usually quite a large group of people. They don't have to be the majority, but they're not limited only to the capitalist class that makes the greatest profits and that has the greatest benefits from the existing society the way it is, the existing system the way it is. And in Israel in particular, because it has a proportional system of representation, the Knesset, the parliament, is divided according to the number of votes each party gets. Then I think, unlike places like the UK or like the US, you have a plurality of parties, and each one of these parties really represents a specific kind of ethno-class bloc. And the way that they create governing coalitions really shows us quite a bit about how hegemony is created in this society, about which groups are kind of are the ones who are supporting things the way they are, and which groups are the ones that are not, that are left out, and whose consent is not needed in order for things to continue functioning. So my primary contention today is that there's not going to be much quantitative stuff here. Don't worry. Don't be frightened. My main contention is that today, in the world today, Israel is one of the most economically stable and thereby also one of the most politically stable countries in the world today. If you look at this big graph on the left here, this is growth in GDP since 2005. This big fall here is the 2008 financial crisis. As you can see, growth in Israel only dipped below zero for a very, very small period in 2009, where in the OECD it fell to -4 then, and has been slow ever since. That means that the Israeli economy has kept growing while most of the world's economies have slowed down significantly. Here on the right, you can see the green line is housing prices in Israel. Where in other places in the world the housing market collapsed. In Israel, the housing market is overheated and has been overheated for years, which means that people who own houses, about 40 to 50% of the population, are gaining in equity. And another important statistic, unemployment is also extremely low in Israel relative to the rest of the world. This is Israel versus the OECD, and you can see that it's been lower than the average since 2010, and it's remained that way. We have about a 4% average, 4% rate of unemployment in Israel today. Maybe just to be clear, these statistics are referring to Israel proper, that is the population of citizens of Israel, which includes the Palestinian citizens of Israel, but does not include the Palestinians in either the West Bank or Gaza Strip, where all these indicators are much lower, unemployment is skyrocketing. Things could not be more dissimilar. So just to be sure that that's clear, that this is the population that I'm talking about. Now, what has been driving this economic success in capitalist terms, of course? High housing prices don't mean success for everybody; they mean success for a particular part of the population. But that said, what is driving this economic growth in Israel for the past 10 years, basically? One aspect of it, I think, is kind of random in a way. It's the fact that the way that bubbles work. There is a real estate and financial bubble in Israel. Capital that's been escaping from other parts of the world because of the crisis has been going into Israel, especially into Tel Aviv, and fueling this rise in real estate prices. But there is also an aspect of what's called the real economy that's involved, and that is the fact that Israel has a very, very internationally successful high-tech sector, industrial technology sector, which is very closely related to the Israeli military. So the Israeli military trains, each year it trains thousands of people in the most kind of up-to-date technologies, especially military-related technologies, and those people are then released into the labor market, basically giving Israeli tech companies a huge bonus kind of subsidy in terms of the people, the skilled labor force that they can recruit. And not coincidentally, of course, many of these tech companies in Israel specialize in military-related technologies. Everything that has to do with like surveillance is really, really big in Israel. You've all heard of Black Cube recently, right? Black Cube is actually a very small company, but bigger companies like no, somebody give me some names. Okay, I'm blanking, but there are bigger companies. What's that? No, Israeli companies. What's that? No, you're just Elbit. Elbit's a good example. Are Israeli companies that do work in surveillance and surveillance-related technologies. They have huge contracts around the world. You know, the Indian military just made a huge contract with Israel, and actually, as economic disorder, economic crisis creates political crisis in many parts of the world, this is actually just wonderful business opportunities for all these Israeli companies that are basically just specializing in repression-related technologies. So as long as things are going badly in the rest of the world, I think they might continue to go well for the Israeli economy. I'm not certain about that because, as I said, I think there is also a kind of bubble aspect of this growth here. And for example, the Tel Aviv housing market is showing signs of weakening lately, and that bubble might burst soon, and then that might create all these other effects that I don't know about. I'm not talking about the future. I'm only talking about the present and the recent past. So this economic stability and economic prosperity really has helped Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who I think is a very able politician, to create a social or historical bloc of class and ethnic fractions, which I'm going to kind of go over today. And first I'll talk about them in kind of more abstract class and ethnic terms, and then I'll talk about political parties because they are pretty closely associated. Of course, in any capitalist country, the center of the historical bloc, the center of the social bloc is capital, is the people who own the large corporations, banks, and so on. And these people are on board with Netanyahu and Netanyahu's government because there's been he's always been since he first became finance minister in the 90s a staunch ideological neoliberal, one of the more extreme ones. Has been behind, as finance minister and later as prime minister, has been behind the privatization of most of the Israeli welfare state, education, medicine, all these social sectors are being privatized, and telecom, and being handed over to business interests at very, very, very low prices and making very high profits off of that. So they're game. They're on board. The military, I'll talk a little bit more about the military later, but I think the military is really some more dovish parts of the military establishment, which are actually the intelligence community, sometimes have some issues with the Netanyahu, but basically he has a strategic line of the way he wants to handle the Palestinian conflict that the military is on board with as well. There's the settlers, of course. When I talk about the settlers, I don't just mean people who live in the West Bank. The settlers are an ideological group. They are Jews who live in the West Bank, of course. I mean the settlers as a very ideologically set, very ideologically organized group. You know, they have their own newspapers, they have their own organizations, political parties, of course, and they've been working assiduously over the last several decades. They've made a long march through the institutions, and they've been involved. They've gotten themselves into high places in the military, into high places in the media, into high places in the judicial system, okay, in the professional organizations, and so on. And so long as Netanyahu continues to invest in infrastructure in the West Bank, in settlements in the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlements in the West Bank, as long as he continues to invest in a magnanimous welfare state for Jews living in the West Bank, so long as he continues to invest in roads and other infrastructure for these communities, then they're happy. Sometimes they clash with him because they want him to build more houses, and the Americans are saying do it a little bit more slowly and so on. But really, they're on board, and they're as happy with this government as they've ever been happy with an Israeli government. Finally, parts of the middle class, especially people who are working in the tech sector, people who are working in related sectors, where wages are going up, where people are able to buy houses and enjoy the housing, enjoy the real estate boom. the people in those sectors are more and more on board, basically, with the Netanyahu's government project. Especially Israeli Jews are often, this is one simplistic kind of but an important way of categorizing us ethnically, into Ashkenazi, that is people of Eastern European origin, versus Mizrahi, who are people of Middle Eastern origin. So historically, and I won't go too much into the history because Iran told me I don't have time to, historically, the Ashkenazi middle class, which was really was kind of the people who ruled the state from 48 till 77 and through the labor movement, were associated with the labor movement. That is, with what's called the center left in Israel. But a lot of them have been moving to the right, or at least to the center, in terms of the parties that they're voting for, and these are parties that are going into the government and that are participating in the government with Netanyahu. The Mizrahi middle class, which is mostly newer, Ken Tirza. Okay, if you disagree, you have to tell me later. The Mizrahi middle class, which is mostly newer and has been more historically associated with the Likud, that is with the right wing, is of course also on board. They also have their own new party called Kulanu, which the new finance minister is part of. Finally, we have the Jewish working class in Israel, which is mostly Mizrahi, Middle Eastern origin, and post-Soviet, people of post-Soviet origin. That is, people who immigrated to Israel from the former Soviet Union in the 1990s. Also, quite on board, and this is a more complicated discussion to have as to why. But the evidence in terms of voting patterns is pretty clear. People have jobs, as I've said. They're not unemployed, and people have the opportunity for social mobility through going to the military, through working in the military-related industries, and through moving to the West Bank settlements where they have a magnanimous welfare state that can serve them if they're interested in moving there. Let's talk about this a little bit in terms of politics now. I'll talk about the wobbling and the excluded a bit later. This is the Knesset. This is the current Knesset that we have. There's 120 members. The picture is taken from Wikipedia. I would have arranged it a little bit differently, but in terms of where the left and the right are, but it's generally it works more or less. So the current coalition, I think, has 66 members and is made up of the Likud. This is the biggest wing, this is the biggest party of the right. This is Netanyahu's party. And under Netanyahu's rule, especially since the last election, it's becoming a little bit more of a big tent party. That is, it represents a lot of different interests because a lot of people are entering into the Likud from people who used to support other parties of the right. So in the Likud, you have today people who come from the Mizrahi and the Russian working classes. You have settlers, you have very extreme right settlers who are inside the Likud nowadays. You have people who are ex-military, that is various generals and colonels, and assorted, really, even ex-kibbutzniks, people who really come from the labor movement. To the right of the Likud, you have two parties. Israel Beitenu and the Jewish Home. Jewish Home is Naftali Bennett, the education minister. This is the Settlers Party. This is the Orthodox Zionist, National Zionist movement. These are people who have been this movement has been ideologically very, very involved in the settlement project in the West Bank and formerly in the Gaza Strip as well. And this is really the ideological home of the settlers, even though, as I said, there's also settlers in the Likud now. Israel Beitenu was headed by Avigdor Lieberman, who's currently defense minister, and this is another kind of a far right group, but actually secular. It represents mostly people of post-Soviet origin, and their kind of secularity, their social liberalism derives, among other things, from the fact that many of the people who immigrated from the ex-Soviet Union don't actually count as Jews in Israel, according to the Orthodox definitions. So, for example, there are 4 civil marriages, which is something that doesn't exist in Israel. And you have the 2 religious parties, Shas and Torah Judaism. Shas is a Mizrahi, it has the poorest, the working class voters of any Jewish party in Israel. It's an ultra-Orthodox religious party, but many of its voters are not ultra-Orthodox. In terms of kind of class politics, it is the one that's always, I think, trying to pull back against the neoliberalizing kind of tendencies of the Likud and the other kind of economically right-wing parties of the coalition. but it's been having a tough time doing so, especially since their power has gone down. Again, a lot of their voters have moved to the Likud in the recent elections. Torah Judaism represents the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi Ashkenazi population, which is, I don't have time to go into them too much, but we can talk about them in the Q&A if you like. Kulanu, the light blue one, that's kind of this is the new centrist party. There's always new centrist parties in Israel. They kind of recycle themselves every couple election cycles. But Kulanu, I think, is interesting, and it's different because it's headed by Moshe Kachlan, who's a Mizrahi, very kind of consciously Mizrahi leader. And he's finance minister, so he's definitely leading Israeli neoliberalism into the new century, into the new decade, with policies that are basically intended to make consumption cheaper by encouraging imports. It's really bad for Israeli industry. The Israeli industrialists don't like him, but for now, it seems to be working with the voters who are getting cheaper TVs and stuff. Yesh Atid, to the left of that, is not really left of Kulanu. Yesh Atid is like Yair Lapid, if you guys know who he is, like always seeking the extreme center. He used to be foreign minister for Benjamin Netanyahu. He's actually not in government right now, but he seems to not notice because he's still traveling the world, explaining, hasbaraing Israel. And it's really hard to tell like what exactly is his ideological or political opposition to what Netanyahu is doing, because there's almost nothing. Now there's a bunch of corruption scandals which are threatening to maybe bring Netanyahu down, and of course Lapid is against all of that, but he's not. There's no political open space between him and Netanyahu. Then we have Labor, the Israeli Labor Party. It's in red, although they don't deserve that color. The Labor Party, again, I mentioned, is historically the ruling party of Israel until 1977. Ben Gurion, the founding prime minister, and they still have this mentality that they're the ones who are like the natural leaders of the country. Although they've just been shrinking, and the possibility of them actually forming a coalition is getting smaller and smaller. And their current leader, Avi Gabay, actually is also Mizrahi, which is interesting. But he's a total capitalist. He used to be the CEO of Bezeq, Israel's biggest telecom company. And again, in terms of social and economic policy, not much difference from the Likud. And also in terms of his attitude towards the Palestinian issue, it's very difficult to understand in what sense labor is in any way different from Netanyahu. At certain moments, like the current moment when Netanyahu is making pragmatic deals with Hamas, for example, in the Gaza Strip, Labor is attacking him from the right. They're saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be making these deals with Hamas," right? So, Labor and Yesh Atid are also doing that. Then, like I said, I don't really agree with the order of things here, so I'll go to Meretz next. Meretz is the only party that you can really call Zionist left in Israel today, because I think they really are a left party, at least in terms of social what are called in the U.S. cultural issues like gay and lesbian rights, marijuana legalization. They have all the most progressive attitudes. But they're sort of social democracy light, I think, in terms of what their economic positions are, and it kind of varies depending on who you ask there. But in terms of who they're representing, the people that are really being represented within Meretz, which hasn't been a member of a governing coalition for a very long time, is I would say the younger kind of intelligentsia part of the middle class, people who are working in media, in the academy, in NGOs. Very, very heavily concentrated in Tel Aviv proper. Not even in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, but in Tel Aviv, the city, which is only 400,000 people. And insofar as there are Jews in Israel who are, in support of, say, Palestinian statehood, as we would recognize it as Palestinian statehood and not some sort of joke called statehood, these are people who are voting for Meretz. Some of them, I'm from that milieu as well, obviously, and some of us have crossed the lines into non or anti-Zionism. And support the joint list, which I'll talk about soon. But I think there's, the previous speaker, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your name, Louise, mentioned Coalition of Women for Peace. Of course, there are other civil society organizations that include Jewish participants. Again, like myself, Academia for Equality, an organization that I'm a member of. that I'm one of the leaders of, is also another civil society organization which is non-Zionist and recognizes the equal rights of the Palestinian people, including the right of return. But there's very few of us. There's people here who are from the previous generation of the Israeli radical left, and there's even fewer of us than there were when they were around. So that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about progressive forces in Israel. Then there is the real progressive force in Israel, which is the Palestinian citizens of the country. Okay, they form more than 20% of the population. They're represented in the Knesset for the first time by one party called the Joint List. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is, and I think it's kind of in a way obvious as to why this particular population would be the one that is kind of the bridge for peace, right? Palestinian citizens of Israel are the ones who have the greatest interest, I think, out of all the people in the area, in there being a peaceful and democratic solution to the conflict, right? There are people who are, on the one hand, are citizens of Israel, want to remain citizens of Israel, want to participate in the society, in Israeli society. And on the other hand, are members of the Palestinian nation and have relatives and friends in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, and in the diaspora. And so, I think it's not at all surprising that these people and their political representatives would be the people who are the ones who are most kind of clearly in favor of what we would recognize as a just peace. So let me just say a few more words about the Joint List, because I think it's quite important for people here to understand more about it. One moment. So, why is there actually a Joint List? It's an interesting proposition because it didn't happen because the parties thought it should happen. What happened was in the previous Knesset, Victor Lieberman from Israel Beitenu, from the extreme right, had this brilliant idea that if the minimum bar for representation was raised, then all these small Palestinian parties wouldn't make it into the parliament, right? So they raised it to 5%. What then happened was that these four Palestinian parties, I'll say which ones they are in a minute, joined forces for the first time. The Palestinian voters liked it so much that they actually increased their representation, and they're now the third largest party in the Knesset, with 13 spots, which is more than 10%. Of course, they're pariahs. Nobody wants to have a coalition with them. Even Labor says Avi Gabay, the leader of Labor, says he wouldn't take them into a coalition, which means that he will never have a coalition. You can see how this works. But the Palestinian voters really liked it, and now they've increased their representation, which means that I think that so long as they're allowed to run, they're going to keep running in this formation because it's good for them. So who are the forces behind the Joint List? The first one, I'm going in order of the size of the representation. The first one is Hadash in Hebrew, or Al-Jabha in Arabic, the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, which was formed by the Communist Party, but it has some extra members who aren't members of the Communist Party, like myself, and also like its leader, Ayman Odeh. So I'm in good company. This is the one party. This is the only one of the four parties that has a significant Jewish component, and it's significant not so much in terms of numbers. I think we don't have more than 5% in terms of the votes, but it's significant in terms of the importance that the Palestinian activists feel that we have. It's important for the Palestinian activists to have a Jewish component, which means that we actually have outsized influence and for example, out of 4 or 5 representatives of Hadash within the Joint List, one of them is a Jew, Dov Khanin. So the Palestinian, I just want to underline this, the Palestinian community within Israel is underrepresented in the Knesset, and still it sends one, with its votes, it sends a Jew to the Knesset. Another Jew, I think is a strong testament to internationalism. The second group I want to talk about is Balad in Hebrew again, or Tajammul in Arabic, which is the National Democratic Party. It's kind of it's more of a liberal party. I think one of its main achievements has been in bringing Palestinian women into the Knesset. It's had 2 female representatives already, as opposed to Hadash, which only has 1. It's had a female Jew, but that doesn't count. And it doesn't count for this particular. You understand? I'm getting mixed up here. And the third force is the Islamic movement, Half of the the Islamic movement in Israel does not participate in the elections, but the other half does, and it's part of the joint list. Represents a much kind of poorer constituency, obviously only Muslims. There are also Christian and Druze Palestinians in Israel, but a lot of the Bedouin, who are really the poorest of the poor among the Palestinians in Israel, are strong supporters of the Islamic movement today. And finally, there's the Arab Movement for Change, which is really kind of a personal network around a personally popular politician named Ahmed Tibi. So those are the four components of the joint list, and that is where they stand. So, again, let's go back to kind of this Gramscian analysis of how Israeli society is kind of made into a historical block, and those who are excluded from it. There are also parts of the Jewish middle class which are kind of wobbling between being completely part of the bloc, supporting the government, supporting the way the state is working, and between being completely excluded from it and against it. And I think one of the main reasons for this is because these are the parts of the Israeli middle class that are the most kind of internationally connected, and the fact that Israel is becoming an international pariah among liberal and leftist circles. That's just important to say, because in the right, the global right, Israel has never had better press than it does today, right? I don't know if you saw this picture of Bolsonaro, the incoming fascist prime minister in Brazil. His sons walking around wearing like IDF shirts. So Israel is widely popular on the right in the world, but these aren't people who consider themselves to be on the right, or they don't consider themselves to be neo-fascists or anything like that, and they're extremely uncomfortable with the way that Israel is being associated on the world stage with the right, even the extreme right. Recently, following the Pittsburgh massacre, again, with Israeli politicians completely backing Trump up, where the American Jewish community was saying, no, listen, Trump does bear responsibility for this. That's I think one of the more kind of explosive wedges that's been driven between the Jewish community abroad, the Jewish communities abroad, and Israel, which is there's a rift there that's growing. And some people in Israel, some people, again, among the more educated and internationally connected parts of the middle class, are pretty worried about it. So those are people who might be kind of wobbling between being part of the governing kind of coalition, the ruling coalition, and being outside of it and being against it. So finally, we can reach this question of who the allies for the UK Labour Party are. We can first listen to the voices of people on the Israeli left before we listen to John Landsman. We can listen to people on the Israeli left or the center left and hear what they have to see, what they have to say about Corbyn and the Labour Party. The Israeli Labour Party has gone full out anti-Corbyn, full out Labour is an anti-Semitic party now. Michal Biran, who's kind of like one of their sort of who's a member of Knesset, has been saying they wanted clarification. Avi Gabay, again, the new leader of the Labour Party, has suspended ties with the British Labour Party. And on the other hand, the members of the Joint List, members of Knesset of the Joint List, completely independently of JVL and of me, this is a completely different initiative. Wrote a letter saying that they support Corbyn as a champion of peace and justice, as a champion of the Palestinian cause. I want to reiterate that the main reason that the people from the Joint List and the main reason the Palestinian citizens of Israel are so pro-Corbyn, so pro-UK Labour now, is because of Corbyn's history as a supporter of the Palestinian cause, and because of the pro-Palestinian stances that Labour is taking under him. It's not because they have a particular stance on the social question in Britain. They're not even necessarily socialists, but they do recognize an ally of the Palestinian people when they see one. Then there's this letter that we sent. By the way, it was really not my initiative or only my work. There's a group of us that was working on it. It was JVL did turn to us to ask us to do it, and we were happy to comply. We wrote specific on the issue of the anti-Semitism accusations against the Labour Party. I want to emphasize, I realize that there's been all sorts of mini debates about this on the British left. We don't deny the fact that there might be an anti-Semitism problem within the British society and even on the British left. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying in our letter is that we trust the leadership of the Labour Party is taking steps is taking the appropriate steps in order to deal with this and to do this kind of educational work that is necessary in order to overcome it. And we have I don't think you can it's probably too small for you to see, but there are figures from Balad and from Hadash, from two senior figures from two of the joint list components did sign the letter, and we did get a personal friend of mine, Uri Anzenberg, who's the head of the Tel Aviv branch of Meretz, which is significant. But really, we reached out to a lot of people in Meretz, including all of their members of Knesset, and none of them were interested in signing. Basically, Meretz so far has kept mum on this whole issue. From what I understand from people inside there is that they really this is the last thing they want to deal with is this whole issue of is Corbyn an anti-Semite or not. They're really not. They don't have much of an international perspective. They're really preoccupied with internal Israeli issues. They're not, insofar as they're social democrats at all. They're not like radical social democrats. They're not particularly enthusiastic about Corbyn the way radical leftists are in other parts of the world. So I did paste this tweet up here by John Landsman because I don't think he's wrong, but I think that there's a different switch in emphasis that needs to be made here. The people within Israeli politics who have proven themselves already or have shown themselves already to be allies for Labor as it stands today, as a left-wing party, for the people who have shown themselves to be allies to Jeremy Corbyn and to his leadership are people from the Joint List and people from civil society who are non-Zionist. Meretz has yet to make any pronouncement on this issue. I really don't think, he specifically mentions the current leader, Tamar Zandberg. I wouldn't be looking to her for any revelations on this issue. And I'll end on this note. I just think, Israeli society might still change. It will change. The only constant in the world is change. And things will look different probably in the near future, and maybe not as hopeless as they do now. Although things might also change for the worse. That can always happen as well. In any case, I think it's important to ally with people who you can trust. It's important to ally with people with whom you have a long-standing relationship and deep ideological kind of agreements, rather than only finding people who are kind of tactical allies. Meretz is a party which is looking at very low polling numbers. It might disappear in the next election. I hope not. I sincerely hope that it doesn't, even though I'm not a supporter of Meretz. The Joint List isn't going anywhere unless it's thrown out of the Knesset, which is also a possibility. There have been attempts made, and there may be new ones under the new nation-state law, which makes this more possible. So the current situation in Israeli politics is not very promising. But I think the Labour Party does have allies, and has allies first of all amongst the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and second of all among the very small but not insignificant group of Jewish activists who stand in solidarity with the Palestinians in Israel and everywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to both stay up for questions?
Sure.
Is that all right? I wanted to thank you both very much, and also Rachel Lever, where are you? It was Rachel's idea, the letter that you all worked on.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rachel, very much for that.
Thank you.
I might want to intervene in the discussion a bit.
Yes, of course.
Rachel, did you bring the scroll?
I think
I've got pictures of it.
I want to see them.
what would you prefer to take the questions as they come or at the end?
Don't do a few, because otherwise...
Do a few, so I've got one for you each. Okay, but let's get some. I'm expecting you to note them, and I will... Yes. Okay, so Glenn at hand, yes.
Thank you very much.
You've got pen.
I'll find a piece of paper and a
I'll
pen.
give you some. I'll find them. Yes, right, good.
Thanks very much for that. Great. Could you say, talk about the history a bit, please?
Yes, okay, thank you. That's what it is, yes.
Just the point that Gidon Levy's letter in Haaretz on the 9th of August was quite a big, I don't know, it wasn't a letter, it was a piece in total support of Jeremy Corbyn. It should just be on that list. No, not that he's a politician, but in the media.
Yes, okay. More questions. Sorry.
I wonder if you could put the Haaretz, the newspaper, where you think that sits.
All right.
This is the button, isn't it?
Yes, no, fine.
Little
Rachel?
question at this point. At the point where that letter was being got together, there was another parallel thing happening, and I've got no idea where it's gone to, but Itai Mack, there was a lawyer with 18 people supporting him, put in a Freedom of Information request to the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, asking them quite bluntly what help and what finances they had given towards the campaign against Corbyn.
We'll try and find somebody who has an answer. So my guess is
we'd just like to know, have that, a bit of feedback on that.
Question.
Update.
Question. I'll put mine in, and while I wait for others, sorry. Richard, you go first, and I'll put.
Yes, I'd like to push you to say more, not about the parties, but about the social movements and the NGOs, particularly standing together, which seems to be a mass force on the ground in Israel. I mean, able to turn tens of thousands out occasionally on demonstrations. And insofar as the Labour Party here is considering itself a social movement rather than a traditional Labour Party, I think looking for allies at that kind of level in Israeli society becomes increasingly important. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. I've got a question for Louise and then one for Matt. Have you any idea what's going on within the Labour Party and within the trade union movement about our current affiliation to the Labour Party in Islam and what might about the fact that at the moment we've affiliated to a Labour Party who, if I remember, have said that they want nothing to do with Corbyn. So I thought our Labour Party in Britain is still affiliated.
Our Labour Party is affiliated to the Israeli.
Although Mr. Govey has said that he wants nothing to do with Corbyn. Isn't that right, folks? Yeah.
I don't know what the
No,
links
the
are.
JLM is affiliated to them.
No, sorry, it's affiliated, the wrong word. I thought that our Labour Party still has got a connection with Israel.
It has through the Second International, but our Labour Party has distanced itself from the Second.
Still, then I will.
So maybe
then I-
That's fine. That's it. There's no real.
My question for Matt is maybe rather a tricky one. I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't think it'd be tricky for you, but it's a tricky question, in this tricky concept. Are there Palestinians in Israel who do not want to be part of the political system? They feel so hostile to it and to what the government's doing. And for example, when they have friends and relations in the West Bank and in Gaza, is there pressure on them sometimes not to be not to join the government? Okay, thank you. Do you want to start?
Either way.
Any more questions? Sorry, the gentleman here. Sorry, another
We
question.
can also do another round later.
Okay, we'll do another round. We're definitely going. Yes, good.
All right. So, Histadrut is Israel's traditionally large trade union federation. It's very closely connected to the Israeli Labour Party, and I wouldn't. It's not. How should I put it? It's not a very militant trade union federation. It hasn't been growing much in recent years, and I think it's actually been shrinking. It has been. What is interesting on the trade union scene in Israel, and I think is important to note in terms of civil society, is the emergence of a new trade union federation called Koach LaOvdim, which means power to the workers. One of their heads actually signed our letter, Ami Vaturi, who's a left-wing Zionist and who's a very I think he sees himself as a social democrat on the Swedish model. He's very involved with the Swedish left as well, and he's very pro Corbyn. Although I don't think the organization itself takes a stance. Neither does the Histadrut, but I wouldn't expect the Histadrut to take any different stance from what the Israeli Labour Party does. As for other social movements, I wouldn't say that there are any other really strong social movements on the Israeli left at the moment. The way I understand standing together is basically as an effort to rebrand existing things that have been happening. There are people who are very good at kind of the optics of doing a demonstration, of like making a lot of pretty signs, but they don't really bring more people out to demonstrations than have been coming out for the past few years. They've never brought tens of thousands of people out to a demonstration. Unfortunately, I wish they had. The biggest sort of what they call the radical left in Israel, the biggest demonstrations we've had in the last few years have not been more than 5,000 people. And it's true that nowadays, Standing Together, Umdim Beyachad, are the ones who are organizing those demonstrations. They have a lot of logistical capability, and I'm not saying that to denigrate them at all. But they haven't. I don't think they've been making the kind of. I don't think they've been what do you call it? Like breaking out of the usual suspects of the radical left in Israel as they would have liked to. I'm sure that's what they've been planning to do, but from where I'm looking, it hasn't been too successful.
What do you mean usual suspects?
I mean that there's if you look at like Israeli Jews who are willing to publicly support, I would say, non-Zionist point of view, okay, which is really supporting a two-state solution along the lines of the UN resolutions, with a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, with a just solution to the refugee issue, based on the 67 borders. This is kind of beyond the pale of mainstream politics in Israel today, and the number of Jews, again, of Jewish citizens of Israel, almost all the Palestinian citizens of Israel would agree, but the number of Jewish citizens who are willing to support this sort of stance doesn't really go far beyond the people who support, Meretz, who are about maybe, I don't know, how many votes do they get? Maybe 200,000, plus what we call the radicals, or the non or anti-Zionists like myself, who are not more than maybe 10,000 at this point.
So those ones in Meretz are Zionists, but on the left?
Yes, I would say so.
I met one the other day and I didn't understand where she was coming from, so now
I mean, you can argue, and I'm sure a lot of Palestinians would say that it's impossible to be Zionist and on the left, but I'm not going to go into that particular argument at this point. Haaretz is a liberal paper. I think it takes strong positions on the Palestinian issue. It employs Amira Hass, who is a social force on her own. It's not a left-wing newspaper. Its economic positions are right-wing. And its economic pages, the marker is like the leading neoliberal paper in Israel, and it represents this demographic, the one that we've been talking about more or less. Those are the people who read it. Of course, a lot of people read it in English. My partner works for Haaretz, by the way, so what do you call it? Gilui Naot in English? Disclosure statement? Okay. Itai Mack is another wonderful person who does a lot of important work. He's a lawyer who works on the Israeli arms trade, and he does a lot of kind of freedom of information requests. I don't know what he's come up with regard to this. It might probably take some time, and he might not get anything because it can all be redacted. I hope he does. It's a very interesting project. As for Palestinians who reject the Israeli political system altogether, yes, they do exist. I mentioned the northern branch of the Islamic movement in Israel, which is affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood, and has been actually outlawed recently. Its leader is Raad Salah, who I don't know if he's currently in prison or not. He keeps going in and out, and they reject participation in the Israeli parliamentary system, although they do participate in municipal elections sometimes. There's also a left-wing organization called Ibn al-Balad, the Children of the Land, which is much smaller than it used to be, but they also, from a left-wing kind of Palestinian nationalist position, reject participation in the political system. On the other hand, it's also important to say that there are Palestinians who vote for Zionist parties and Palestinians who are active in Zionist parties. There was a member of Knesset for the Labour Party, Zohair Ba'alul, who's a famous football announcer, not announcer, what do you call it, like a football journalist, who became a member of Knesset for the Labour Party, but then actually got into a conflict with Avi Gabay because he was too leftist for Gabay and had to leave. Basically, he left the Knesset. And then there's the Druze community. You might have heard that a Druze officer was killed in an operation in Gaza yesterday. Most of the Druze community is the men are conscripted like Jewish men, and they're very closely involved with security services. So a lot of them are Zionists as well. A lot of them are not. I think that's it.
Thank you. Louise,
your question.
No, I think that's the one.
Did I answer?
Yes,
Okay.
is not wanting to. Yes.
I think it's been answered, the question about the Labour Party. I think they have distanced themselves from the Israeli Labour Party. I was just going to say, I think what Richard said is really important, because if we don't for me, if we don't start engaging with progressive forces, you can't rely on political parties. We have to take control ourselves in lots of ways. We need to, grab things while we can and, link up with those progressive forces and build our movement from the bottom. That's the only way we are going to change. Yes, we do have to get things, it's good that we've got policy through the Labour Party. It's good that we've got good trade union policy on it. But that will do nothing. That's just a bit of paper that's going to stay on a shelf if we don't force it through and force them to do something and make a difference. So I think the more we do to link up with other people, the better it will be, really. So for me, that's going to be the driver and the thing that will change it.
Thank you. And the man over here, please. And then...
Yeah, two questions. One a small one. I didn't quite understand the point about 5%. Were you saying, was Matan saying that 5% of support for the joint list is Jewish? Is that right?
Okay,
anyway, but the main point I had is I'm from an organisation called Labour to Palestine. We had a visit to
called what? Sorry.
Labour to Palestine,
right.
And we had a visit to Palestinian citizens of Israel earlier this year, during which we met both Adnan O'Day and Dov Hanin, and indeed Hanin Zouabi. We discussed this kind of issue a bit. And the conundrum, as I see it, is that the Israeli Avi Gabay doesn't want to be associated with the Labour Party, and I'm sure the feeling is entirely mutual. Meretz are the more natural partner, the only Jewish Israeli party that opposes the occupation, so the only party that Labour could plausibly regard as a sister party through the Socialist International. Although at the moment it's the Labour Party that has the title of sister party, but Meretz would be a much better fit. But will it actually help Meretz to be associated with the Labour Party? I suspect it might easily push them below the threshold, and then they would lose their representation completely. And the Joint List, of course, is not a socialist party, certainly not a member of the Socialist International, so couldn't have a formal link with the Labour Party. And in any case, the politics of this are quite difficult, because if the Labour Party tried to forge some kind of link with the Joint List and no other party, it would be, well, I'm asking the question, how would it be seen in Israel? But I rather suspect it would be seen as a gratuitous kind of distancing of the Labour Party from all the Jewish Zionist parties. And it wouldn't do anybody, either side, much good. So it's very difficult. I mean, obviously, NGOs and civil society organisations is a completely different thing, but political parties, I don't see quite how we get through this conundrum.
That's both speakers. This is that one. Naomi?
Yes, hi. Thanks, Louisa and Matan. I'm very sorry that we couldn't get you a bigger audience, but I think it's just a sort of reflection of the state of play at the moment. We had to be so aware of security, we could hardly publicise this meeting in the way we would hope to do, so I'm sorry about that. Maybe we should be bolder and just have armed guards at the door or something, I don't know. Anyway, I was wondering, I do take Martin's point about the political party links and how difficult that is, but I'm also thinking, we're often asked, but what about the peace camp, there used to be a peace bloc, didn't there? Where does Gush Shalom fit into all this? Does it exist, or with Yuri Avneri's demise, has it disappeared completely? Because I think really, although the meeting was billed as questioning, are there allies for Israeli Labour in terms of for Corbyn's Labour Party in Israel, it's really also a question of, are there allies for people active on the left and people campaigning in solidarity with Palestine, whether we do it organisationally through the Labour Party or not. So it's kind of a bit of a wider question, really.
It's just peace as well, isn't it?
Yes, that's...
Yes, thank you. Francis?
Yes, I was going to say something very similar, because when I speak to people who don't know much or just read the papers, they have no idea that there's a left in Israel. They don't know that people go on demonstrations. A friend of mine came over this week and says she goes on demonstrations, it terrifies her because she can't stand crowds, but she goes. Now, I think that we should find some approach to publicising the Israeli resistance, because the assumption that it isn't there is actually anti-Semitic. It's like a sort of anti-Semitism. It's horrible, though it's not intentionally so. And really, really, we need to somehow resolve this, because it's as if there's a country with a fascist government with nobody objecting and saying what's happened to the Jews. It's very, very bizarre. And I mean, Avneri, people who haven't heard of the Avneri and Gush Shalom stuff, Keller is still sending stuff out, but is there a way of building, I mean, from the ground floor upwards, as you're saying, some way of getting these people really, really noticed?
Okay, thank you, Rachel and Teresa, and then Rachel.
Yes, I think, how shall I put this? It's not just in the Israeli politics that we need to be looking at the NGOs and the, you know, and the movements and the groups and everything. It's also here. Yeah. So it's unthinkable that, you know, the Labour Party will make a connection with Zochrot, for instance. You know, it's just not on. It's not possible for them. They live in different spheres. But it's highly possible for, I hate to say Momentum because of all the problems there, but, you know, but the LRC or all sorts of political currents within the Labour Party that are quite powerful, and JVL is obviously in there with them, to be making much closer associations and links. I mean, it took a long time to get that letter together, which is one reason why it was never presented in the way it was meant to be. It was just, we ran out of time. But the thing was that was what that was saying, and what that was about was to say that we've got a common interest in having the right to free speech and the right to support Palestine. And it was saying that, you know, if Corbyn is defeated on that, then that's a defeat for the left in Israel as well. And that common interest, I think that's something to build around. And, you know, the 300 names on that letter is actually quite a good nucleus of brave and good people that we have a lot in common with. And I think that we should have, in some form or another, whether it's organisational or, you know, political or whatever, some ongoing relationship that builds on that. You know, it was a great thing to have done, but that was saying we've got a common interest in fighting for justice. We're all fighting for justice. It's not possible. I mean, it was focused on Corbyn because he was under threat at the time, and this was a really important message to say that, you know, it wasn't Corbyn versus the whole of Israel, that within Israel there were people that, you know, that could support what it was, you know, the Corbyn project. But yeah, anyway,
thank you.
I've got three people myself.
I've got three people. I've got you all three. So Teresa, and then this gentleman, then you. Thank you.
There used to be an organization in this country called Just Peace UK. We formed it at the beginning of the second Intifada, and it existed actively until 2005. Actually, many of the people in this room belong to this organization, and from it later grew Jews for Justice for Palestinians as well. The remit of Just Peace UK was to create a platform for Jews in this country who do not agree with the Israeli government's policies, and to enable dissent voices within the mainstream Jewish community, within the Jewish community, acknowledging, as we saw very recently, that dissent within the Jewish community is very, very difficult, if not harmful for some people. There were two objectives to Just Peace UK. The first was to support the Israeli left, the Israeli movement against the occupation, and the second is to support, to do what we can to support Palestinian rights. And the way we did it was we brought speaking tours of either Palestinians from the occupied territories and or of people from the Israeli left. In that way, we brought colleagues of Matan when he was a refusenik. We brought a bereaved parents circle. We brought combatants who didn't exist yet then, but we would have gladly brought Zochrot, which is a fantastic organization who really does a lot of work to reinstate into the state of mind of people, make awareness of the Palestinian history and of the Nakba. I would like to suggest that JVL will take this role. Just Peace UK still exists, as far as I know, as an email discussion group, but only that. Since 2005, we haven't done any active meetings, organization, and so on. At the time, we did work quite closely with Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but again, our focus was to change perceptions and views within the Jewish community. And that, I dare say, we did quite well. I think we opened the door, and I really think that JVL is positioned well to take this role forward and do it from now. And maybe this way we can support the Israeli left, and I agree that it is very important that people here will know that there is an opposition to the occupation in Israel.
Yeah. In your political graph, you mentioned Torah Jews. There are about 50,000 Torah Jews here in England. They call themselves Nutricarta. And the vast majority of them support Jeremy Corbyn, very strongly support Jeremy Corbyn. And 20 rabbis signed a letter fully supporting Jeremy Corbyn. My question is, what party are they linked with in Israel? And the supplementary question is, what percentage of the Palestinians in Israel vote for the giant list?
Okay, thank
Roughly.
you. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because I think if I understood Matan right, the number of Israeli left is actually quite small.
Right.
As not thousands as we all hope there is. And so my question really is, to what extent would, I mean, lots of people here were saying with much more authority and knowledge than me, to what extent would encouragement, support, whatever, from outside, from Britain or even America, in what way would that help to grow the left? I mean, or would it at all? I'm just wondering whether we're living in cloud cuckoo land. I mean,
okay, that's a lot of questions. Okay, so Matan's needs to do the ones before he forgets that. Thank you, people.
Okay, well, these are really good questions. They put me in a tight spot, but I think maybe it's the spot that I've put myself in. So I'll say a few general words before I get into particular answers, and if I forget anybody, then please remind me. I'll start with an anecdote. Another Israeli leftist comrade, we were both at the Historical Materialism Conference here a few days ago. He asked a question from the audience in one of the panels, and he said, as a member of the Israeli left, etc. And then one of the panelists looked at him and said, well, what do you mean by the Israeli left? As if that was like a contradiction in terms. And I felt for him, of course, and it's never pleasant to be erased like that, I don't know if it's necessarily anti-Semitic. Jews do it sometimes too, which doesn't make it necessarily anti-Semitic, but And I think I'm coming. My answer to this question: is there an Israeli left? Is kind of a complicated one. On the one hand, and this is maybe my reply to you, the left in Israel exists, is strong, is large. It just happens to be mostly Palestinian. Now, I'm not saying this is what you meant, but to say that there is no left in Israel is to entirely erase all those Palestinian leftists. Okay? Now, many of them would not call themselves Israelis, which is a tricky terminological question, but they are citizens of Israel. And they're adamant about the fact that they're citizens of Israel and they want to be equal citizens of Israel. Hanin Zoabi, who is the bête noire of the Israeli establishment, and I don't know if she considers herself a leftist, maybe she might consider herself a liberal, but her position is full citizenship, and Balad's position is full citizenship. Their slogan is a classical liberal slogan, a state for all of its citizens, and it's considered anathema by the Israeli establishment, right? They even had to pass a law clarifying that this isn't the state of all of its citizens. And when we say the left in Israel is only Meretz, or the left in Israel is only, when we talk about the Israeli left and only talk about the Jews on the Israeli left, then I think that's where we're internalizing some strong racism there. And this is something that Palestinians also do. Palestinians who aren't from 48, Palestinians who aren't from Israel, and I think it's a very common situation for what I forget which academic. An academic has called them trapped minorities, right? Trapped minorities like this are often forgotten by both sides, and I think it's critical. The more important thing before you go sending flowers and care packages to the Jewish left in Israel, send flowers and care packages to the Palestinian left in Israel. They deserve it more because they're much bigger and much stronger and much more important than we are, and because they take a lot more shit than we do. Friends and comrades of mine who are activists in the Communist Party of Israel, not the most radical of the communist forces in Israel, but definitely there. They've been thrown into interrogation rooms by the Shabak, by the Internal Security Service, for doing things that I've also done and not been even arrested for. So those are people, those are leftists, those are internationalists, those are people who, insofar as they know what's going on in Britain, are wildly in favor of it, and those people really deserve support. They really deserve, and those are the people who are sending letters. So we have to be really careful, and it is in some ways it's a terminological issue again, because sometimes they don't identify as Israelis, but they do identify as citizens of Israel, and to say that it's irrelevant for Labour to ally itself with a party that's majority Palestinian in Israel. I mean, again, I don't want to be making any serious accusations, but I don't think that's a legitimate political point to make.
Thank you.
As for particular, these kind of mechanics of international organizations, the Second International, I think there's all sorts of nefarious parties in the Second International, right? It might be time to start a fifth one. Bernie Sanders has been talking about it, right? He wants to do a progressive international with Corbyn, of course, and I'm sure Ayman would love to join. I'm sure the Joint List would love to join, if we were asked. And in some countries, there's 2 members, of an international, so maybe Meretz could also join. We wouldn't mind, people in the Joint List.
So what would you call the left in Palestine, Israel? What would you say? If you wanted a word that put it together, what would you call it?
No, not in Palestine, Israel, because then you also have the territories. You have the occupied territories.
How would you describe it then? So I could
depends what we're referring to.
If I want to talk about...
You can say the left in Israel.
The resistance...
You can say the left in Israel. I don't know about the resistance. Hillary Clinton is in the resistance, so maybe I'm not in it.
Right.
But you can say it. You can talk about the left in Israel. I don't think that's a contradiction at all.
Right.
As for the peace camp, well, again, this is I'm uncomfortable because I'm the bearer of bad tidings, and I don't want to say mean stuff about other people working in Israel. But I think Gush Shalom is basically defunct. Even before Uri Avneri, Zichrono Livracha, died. I also really don't want to seem like I'm only plugging my organization, but Academia for Equality is an actual growing organization on the Israeli left. We started 3 years ago, and we have more than 450 members. We're specifically in academia, so I think we would like to partner with groups that are working in academia in other countries, including in the UK. I'm sure there's relevant organizations, and we take a strong leftist stance. We support, for example, we don't support BDS as an organization, but we do support people's right to be in favor of BDS, which is a very radical thing to do in Israel, and I'd love to talk more about that if people are interested afterwards. As for what we call Haredim in Israel, or ultra-Orthodox, sometimes is a word that's used. It's a complicated ecology. There's many groups within that. Neturei Karta are only one part of that. But what's that?
Tiny part.
A tiny part. There's also Satmar. They're also anti-Zionist. But just a note of caution, because I can't go into it in too much length. I think the traditional position of these groups, including within Israel, is that they want to stay out of politics. They want to maintain their own autonomy as a group to get as many resources out of the state as they can, and not to be like in hot water with either side. You may be referring to a different letter, but the letter that I saw from ultra-Orthodox rabbis in in the UK was not an endorsement of Jeremy Corbyn, but was basically just a critique of the mainstream Jewish organizations who have been calling Corbyn anti-Semitic and saying, no, we don't believe he's an anti-Semite, and you guys are going to get the Jewish community in trouble with these people once they get into power. Which is not necessarily a progressive position to take, but not necessarily an anti-progressive one either. But let's not make too much out of it. There were some particular questions about percentages. About 80% of the Palestinians in Israel voted for the joint list this last time.
80.
Yeah, 80.
And the total number of Palestinians?
In Israel?
Yes.
About 22% of the population, so about 1,400,000 people.
Thank you very much. And Louise, I've got a few minutes. Louise, do you want to say anything about the Palestinian groups that you meet up with and the Israeli groups that you meet up with?
Well, I was going to pick up on a couple of things really that I don't think. So the first thing I was going to pick up on was the Labour to Palestine stuff, because for anybody in the room that hasn't, one of the ways to find out about what is happening is to go. Labour to Palestine take there are lots of organisations out there that take trips out and meet, look at the situation in Palestine, but meet with progressive forces in Israel, and that's the way to find out. I know much more from being there than all of the reading that I've done. I've found out much more in my time visiting, so people should look for those sorts of things. And the other thing that I was going to say, I think, was people have asked about, well, how, there isn't anybody coordinating these things. Well, we just have to make links. I've sat here tonight, I don't know your group, but I am going to find out about that group, and I will be making sure I make links with them. And that is what I do all the time as an organisation. That's what we do. And that's what I push in the trade union movement. We have to, it's our duty to go out and do that. It won't just come to us. We have to go out and find people and talk to them. And we have to talk to people we agree with a lot, because that makes us feel much better. But we do have to talk to people that we don't agree with. We have to have conversations. And as long as we remain factual and we talk about facts and we talk about what is happening, then we can have good discussions about the situation. We won't always agree with people, but we won't change society unless we talk about what is happening. And ultimately, what all of us want is a peaceful society, a peaceful world. That's what I want. I'm a socialist. I want a world where there is peace, and I want all peoples to have equality within that world. And the only way we will get that is through dialogue and discussion and by working with progressive forces. So that's the way forward for me.
Thank you. We've got to finish. I wanted to say thank you to the audience. I must say it might be a smaller audience than I've been used to recently in the meetings I've been to, but it's wonderful not to be meeting and the difficulties and hostilities we've been meeting recently. So it's very made up for, and a very good discussion. Thank you very much to both the speakers. I think we should say really excellent.